Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news hour, we shall be discussing the important articles for economy from the Hindu newspaper. The editorial is about the resumption in the household consumer expenditure survey. In yesterday's news, we saw that the government is planning to resume the household expenditure consumption survey, and the editorial is about the same. We also discussed about how in the previous 2017-18, even though the government had collected the survey, it did not release the report. The ministry said that there are discrepancies in the data and there are various divergence between the actual consumption level and the actual output of goods and services. What had happened was, in the 2017-18 survey that was supposed to be released, it showed fall in the monthly per capita consumption expenditure. After 1972-73, again this was the fall. First time the fall was happening in the consumption expenditure, and the rural household expenditure showed a sharper decline. So the government said that the consumption expenditure is shown to be falling. On the other hand, the actual output of goods and services in the economy are increasing. And because there is a discrepancy between both the contradictory and conflicting results, the data was not released. So the editorial says that a better course of action would have been releasing the data and giving out the reasons why the data and the discrepancies took place. For example, maybe the consumption fall was because of the bold structural reforms like the GST and the demonetization that the government took in, and it would have given a rider saying that because of this the short-term consumption expenditure has taken place. The same happened with the UPI government in 2011-2012 when they released the consumer spending data level. The consumption expenditure had got affected again, and then the global financial crisis had an impact on the consumption expenditure. At that point of time, the government said that because of the global financial crisis, there is impact on the consumption expenditure for a short term. So maybe even the current government would have done the same thing by releasing the data and giving a caveat saying that because of GST and demonetization, the short term consumption expenditure got affected. Now the government has said that in the fresh survey, they will incorporate all the data quality refinements, because whatever caused the discrepancies in the previous data collection, they would want to overcome now, and for that they would want to have the indicators which are refined. And having data is very important because this consumption expenditure data is used to estimate the poverty lines in India, both for the urban and rural areas, and used in rebasing the GDP. And also the private consumption expenditure is driven by the trends of this data. For example, if the consumption is increasing, so for a businessman, he should know that he can invest into the business, because from this data he can know that the consumption expenditure in the economy is increasing. So he can predict, because the consumption is increasing, the future demand also would increase, because of which the investment decisions also would get affected. If a businessman sees in this report that the consumption expenditure is falling and the future forecast is also falling, then you would not invest too much into the business. That is why the data is very important, and any further delay by the government in releasing the data would give a bad picture about the government and the economy and the validity and the authenticity of the numbers itself. So the surveys have to be conducted more frequently and more effectively, because all the policy decisions are taken based on such official data numbers. So if the official data numbers are not available and they are delayed for almost 10 years, how can we take good decisions? That is why having proper data to back your decisions is very important. This article talks about the trend of electricity in the South Asian region and what are the challenges and how we can overcome them. It begins by saying that South Asia is having just 5% of the world's land area, but almost one-fourth of the global population is living in this 5% of land area. And it gives out the trends of various nations in achieving the electricity levels. For example, Bangladesh has achieved 100% electrification, whereas Bhutan, Maldives, Sri Lanka had already accomplished it in 2019. India and Afghanistan, the figures are 94.4% and 97.7% respectively. Here we need to know that previously, few years back in 2017, the government had claimed 100% electrification. Even though the 100% electrification doesn't mean that all the households get electricity, because for the ministry, in order to be called a village to be electrified, if more than 10% of the households in a particular village are electrified, if they have electric connection, then that particular village is declared as electrified. So the remaining households may or may not have connections, or even if the connections are there, even if the electric meters are fitted, but there may not be actual electric supply. So all these terms and conditions are there. So the official government data might say 100% electrification, but it doesn't mean that all the households are electrified because of the definition that the ministry follows. And the price of electricity is lowest in Bhutan and highest in India in the South Asian region. And we have a commitment to under transition to provide the renewable energy, and 40% of our energy consumption to be from the renewable energy sources. And all the countries in South Asia have the policy of providing electricity to every household, and the supply has to be reliable, the quality of electricity has to be efficient, and the rates have to be reasonable, and they have to protect the consumer interest also. On one side you have to balance between profitability, and on the other side we have to balance between affordability. One side it is protecting the business interest, other side it is protecting the consumer interest. And there are various issues in the South Asian region when it comes to the electricity. It begins with the generation, and in the transmission losses, distribution, theft of electricity during distribution, wastage during distribution, and connectivity to rural areas where the feasibility might not be working, and low investments in research and development, various environmental issues and lack of clearances because of environmental pollution, and how to conserve the energy, and finally the unskilled human resource. These are all the challenges that the electric sector is suffering. And because the geography of every country differs, there are different approaches followed by various countries in producing the electricity. For example, India heavily depends on coal. Almost 55% of its electricity currently is from the coal. For Nepal, because it has rivers, almost 75%, 99% of Nepal's energy comes from hydropower, and 75%, that is 3/4 of Bangladesh's power, it comes from natural gas. And Sri Lanka used to depend on oil. So you can see how different economies, which are bestowed with different geographical features, are dependent on different ways of power generation. And why is electricity so important? How does and what does the impact it has on the economy? Research has shown that a 0.4% increase in the energy consumption leads to almost 1% increase in the GDP per capita. So you can see the correlation between the energy consumption on one hand and the income increase, that is the GDP increase in the other hand. So how does that happen? Basic economics. More electricity means we have invested more. Because you have invested more, you are consuming more electricity for manufacturing and other service activities, and that means more economic activity. More economic activity means more GDP. So consumption of electricity is an indicator of high investments and economic activity taking place in the economy. And the economy also gets benefited from the widening coverage to households and industries. For example, after the Nepal's earthquake, the GDP increase was mainly because of the urbanization, and that urbanization was helped by the increase in the consumption of electricity. And on the contrast, Pakistan suffered a drop in industrialization because it had huge power shortages. So one hand you can see a country getting benefited because of increasing electricity consumption, and on the other hand a country suffering and the economy suffering because it had power shortages and the entire industry took a hit. And the electricity is indirectly and directly related to various sustainable development goals. For example, increasing the renewable and solar energy is directly related to Sustainable Goal 7, which says that ensure access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable modern energy for all. And various women are empowered and engaged in the electricity generation when it comes to solar entrepreneurs, and it is directly related to SDG 5, which says that gender equality and empowerment for women and girls. Then access to electricity improves infrastructure, which is SDG 9. Then energy access improving the online education and through the affordable internet, that is SDG 4. And more people employed means reduction in poverty because they are earning more income, which is directly related to SDG 1. And SDG 3 is related to ensuring health and lives for everyone and promoting well-being. So because of the increase in electricity consumption, now we can have more technological solutions. So you can see how electricity consumption is related to investment on the one hand, economy on the other, and directly it is having impact and indirect impact on various sustainable development goals. Now because of the climate change and the environmental pollution, we are slowly moving towards green growth and green economy and green energy. In the Glasgow summit in COP26, Prime Minister Modi gave a commitment of net zero achieved by India by 2070. That means the India's renewable energy capacity had to be increased from 450 gigawatt to 500 gigawatt in 2030. And South Asian region, because of the geography, has various renewable energy sources which have to be exploited. We have the opportunities to exploit hydropower. Because we are closer to the equator, we can exploit solar. Then because of the various mountain regions, geothermal energy. And because of the population and the production and the cattle rearing, we can exploit the biomass. So you can see how different types of energy can be exploited. And countries are having various bilateral and multilateral deals. For example, the Clean Development Mechanism and the poverty reduction and the energy efficiency and the improvement the quality of living. All this directly got related when the India-Bhutan hydro trade took place. And the entire region is moving towards green growth now. And regional trade between countries is happening. For example, the India-Bhutan hydro trade in 2010. And even in the SARC document in 2014, they prepared a regional energy cooperation framework, and various bilateral and multilateral trade agreements are happening. For example, the India-Nepal petroleum pipeline, India-Bhutan hydroelectric joint venture, then the BBIN sub-regional framework for energy cooperation, that is Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal. Then we have the Tapi pipeline, which is Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, India and Pakistan pipeline. Probably it will also be extended to Bangladesh in the future. So what does all this mean? Now India exports almost 1200 megawatt of electricity to Bangladesh, which is almost the 25% of its daily energy demand. And Bhutan exports 70% of its hydropower electricity to India. Nepal exports to India, and Nepal also exports their surplus fossil fuel. So you can see here how electricity generation is also earning countries foreign exchange. And what should be the way forward for all this? We should reinforce the transmission and distribution framework now, because the technology that we are using for distribution networks leading to various losses during the transmission. We have to improve in that aspect, and we need to expand the power grids. We need to probably connect the grids with each other. Just like the national grid, we should have a SARC grid where all the SARC nations are connected with each other. And we should boost green energy like the hydroelectricity. So the design practices, we need to have climate proof infrastructure and a flexible monetary framework, because finance is the most important for any aspect. In order to take any new initiative, the finance is very important. Without flexible monetary framework, without the money, we cannot do anything. And here we will realize that government alone cannot do all this. We need private investment as well. So for that, the government has to attract the private investment by giving various SOPs and benefits to the private sector. So public-private partnership in this can be a way forward. That's about this article. It entirely discusses about the challenges, the current state and the future, and the green energy and what needs to be done. It covers the entire energy sector. In the business page, this article talks about how the labor participation rate dips from 46% to 40% in India in the last 6 years. Here, if you can see the graph, from 2016 to 2021-22, the rural labor force participation rate has reduced from 46.98% to 41.38%, and the urban rate has reduced from 44 to 37.55. Here, the fall in urban areas is more. And what is labor force participation rate? This labor force participation rate is that percentage of the total labor force, that is people who are willing to work, who are already working, or who are available for work out of the total population. Here we consider the ages between 16 years to 64 years. And what is unemployment rate? Out of this labor force, how many people are unemployed? That is the unemployment rate. It is the percentage of people who are unemployed out of the labor force participation rate. So here you can again look at the graph. The trend is fluctuating, so there is no proper trend. In case you get a question in prelims saying that labor force participation rate is continuously increasing or continuously decreasing, that would be wrong because it is fluctuating. And this data is released by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. It has showed that the absolute value has reduced from 445 million to 435 million in almost 6 years. And in 2016-17, about 15% of women were employed or looking for jobs, and this has fallen to almost 9.2% in 2021-22. So you can see the impact of the fall, almost 5.8%. And even among men, it has declined to 67% from 74% earlier. And the fall in the urban areas was more than the rural areas. Again, the question could be asked in prelims saying that the fall in rural areas is more than urban areas. That is wrong because the fall in urban areas is more than the fall in rural areas. The participation rate of labor fell in almost all of the states except few states like Rajasthan. And the steep fall was seen in states like Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, where the labor force earlier was one of the highest, and from 54% and 56% earlier, it almost fell by some 17% and 20 percentage points. So you can see the level of fall. That's about this article. You just need to remember the trends here. You don't need to know the actual data, but the trends. And we can skip all these articles. This article also can be skipped. Here again, we need to know that the number of patents filed by the Indians are continuously increasing. The economic survey has also said the same thing. Now again, a report by the NASCOM says that in the Indian patents report says that more than 60% of the patents which were filed by the Indian firms, out of the total patents filed, 60% of the patents were filed by the firms and startups, and almost 17% were filed by the individual investors or the academic research institutions. And out of the total patents filed, most of them were in the technology domain. And in the technology domain, it was related to software applications, healthcare, and medical devices. And of the patents that were filed, almost 45% of the filings had been granted technology patents. That's about this article. These are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.